Strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to be able to speak in support of my legislation, H.R. 40, which I introduced, that establishes a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans, and as well pay acknowledgement and tribute to the Honorable John Conyers, who introduced this legislation in 1989 and entrusted its continuation to me as he retired. I took that challenge seriously, and here we are today, marking up for the first time in the history of the United States of America any legislation that deals directly with the years and centuries of slavery of African American people who are now the descendants of those Africans. I want to thank my colleagues for their persistence and joining me in this legislation, both Mr. Nadler, Mr. Cohen, and all of my colleagues who are here today. To my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, thank you for understanding the pain in which this body of people have experienced. And I ask my friends on the other side of the aisle, do not cancel us tonight. Do not ignore the pain, the history, and the reasonableness of this commission. This is a governmental commission, a commission that establishes the parameters of a study that provide the roadmap for the truth of the brutality and the onerous and terrible burden placed on African Americans and this nation by slavery. I hold in my hand the Constitution, which did not hold us as a whole person in its founding, even though we know that the opening statements in this Constitution says, we ask and expect to create a more perfect union. H.R. 40 is to answer that question of perfection. It's to answer General Sherman's point about 40 acres and a mule. It is to answer the imploding of the Reconstruction that fell on the backs of our ancestors through Jim Crowism and segregation and brutality. It is to answer the question of now some 4,000 of lynchings that occurred, with the predominant number of them, as we will discuss throughout this process, that were African Americans. It will discuss the Social Security legislation by Franklin Delano Roosevelt that for 2 decades, African Americans were not able to participate in large numbers, or redlining that undermined creating wealth, which of course evidences the fact that the wealth gap between white Americans and African Americans is as enormous today as it was in the 1960s. The terror of white violence against African Americans continued well into the 20th century, with historians marking the 1981 Ku Klux Klan lynching of a 19-year-old Michael Donald, innocent in Mobile, Alabama, as a purported final lynching in America. It was supposed to end an era of horror. But look where we are today. A lieutenant in the United States Army brutalized because of the color of his skin, for it seems no other explanation. A young man lost his life just recently in Minneapolis, and the George Floyd trial proceeding in Minnesota as well. Where are we today? Harvard University study indicated that if reparations had been in place before COVID-19, peer review, that there would not have been the numbers of African Americans who got sick, who got infected, and died from COVID-19. Though critics have argued that the idea of reparations is unworkable politically or financially, their focus on money misses the point. The goal of this historical commission and its investigations to bring American society to the new reckoning with how our past affects the current conditions of African Americans, and to make America a better place to help and truly study the disadvantaged. Consequently, the reparations movement does not focus only on payments, but it focuses on remedies that can be created in many forms necessary to equitably address the many kinds of injuries sustained from the chattel slavery and its continuing vestiges. To merely focus on finance is an empty gesture. We're asking for people to understand the pain, the violence, the brutality, the chattelness of what we went through. And of course, we're asking for harmony, reconciliation, reason to come together as Americans. I always believe if you understand, you can act. We want to act today by passing H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.